After the opening weekend for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the big finale for the team that I think a lot of people really latched onto. I think a lot of people like Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, and a bunch of other actors. I can't remember the voice actors. I think one of them is Vin Diesel. Bradley Cooper, that's who plays Rocket Raccoon. I think people genuinely like that team, and it sounds like they had a good send-off. But the box office, while not terrible, certainly isn't as robust as Kevin Feige, Marvel Studios, and the MCU would like it to be. Because Phase 5 of the MCU, when it comes to movies, there's just not a whole lot there. Yeah, the Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, you got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 5, you got the Marvels, you have the new Captain America movie, introducing, obviously, the new Captain America. If you didn't watch the show on Disney+, Blade and then Thunderbolts. It doesn't look like Blade's going to come out. That was probably the other movie that was guaranteed to make them quite a bit of money at the box office. The Marvels is likely to bomb enormously. They've already bombed with Ant-Man and the Wasp. And who knows with Captain America New World Order. That thing's a real wild card. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was the guaranteed winner. The movie that MCU fans could actually look forward to and basically know what you're going to get. So it's likely not to flop, although it's still in play. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, if the box office actually proceeds as it did for some of these previous MCU movies, could actually flop and lose them money, although I don't think that's going to happen. But according to THR, these are the numbers that we do have. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 topped the weekend box office with the domestic opening of $118.4 million, well behind the last film in the standalone Marvel Studios franchise. Final numbers are higher than Sunday's $114 million estimate, thanks to an extraordinary Saturday to Sunday hold for a Marvel pick. The film was down 18%. In the Marvel family, only Avengers Endgame and Avengers Infinity War saw the same or slightly better holds. Overseas, the superhero pick placed number one everywhere, starting off with a better-than-expected $170.9 million from 52 markets for a worldwide debut of $289.3 million. So at least, it surpassed the budget when you look at the worldwide revenues so far. The bad news is, once the domestic numbers start going down and you're relying more heavily on the overseas box office, the studios actually get a smaller cut from the overseas markets themselves than they do from the American box office, especially like a country like China. Hollywood studios make more profit domestically than they do overseas. So that's actually not a great sign, but it does show that the MCU still has some cachet worldwide as a brand. But it's hard to look at these numbers and say that's not good, where you're coming in and underperforming the previous movie, and not just like a little bit. We're talking like $30 million, about a 20% drop off in revenues from the previous opening weekend for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which actually isn't really on trend with the MCU as a whole. There have been a couple of sequels that have underperformed the previous movie, Black Panther Wakanda Forever being the really big one, but that first Black Panther movie really ended up blowing up. But when you look at like the second Doctor Strange movie or even the third Ant-Man and the Wasp movie, those films were still outperforming the previous movie. And we're not seeing that here with Guardians of the Galaxy because the MCU is a damaged brand at this point. Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios could only deliver up so many duds before people that were loyal to the brand of the MCU itself start going, maybe I don't need to see it in theaters. Maybe I should take a wait and see approach. The good news is with that, is there was a good hold from Saturday to Sunday, and the word of mouth for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is actually rather strong. So I don't think they're going to have the enormous drop-offs that some of the other MCU movies have, but it's not really out of the picture because actual tracking to suggest that the drop-off from like Sunday to Monday was extraordinary as well. So we're not really sure exactly what's going on here, but certainly we can say without a shadow of a doubt that the MCU is a damaged brand, and they can't really depend on the revenues that they were before unless it's like a Spider-Man movie at this point. THR continued. Guardians' initial performance in North America is mixed news from Marvel and Gunn. Only a year ago, for example, Marvel's sequel Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness soared to a series best $187 million in its domestic launch. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 opened on par with recent Marvel pick Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, which posted a series best domestic opening of $106 million and $120 million for the 4-day President's Day weekend. That movie, however, was ultimately considered a disappointment after topping out at less than $500 million, a franchise low. That's the weird thing that's going on with the MCU right now, where you have an Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania opens up a lot stronger than the second movie, but then still underperforms the first movie. Die-hard MCU fans aren't showing up on opening weekend anymore, and the quality isn't so high that they're not continuing to come back and like evangelize people and bring their friends that had no interest anymore. I think a lot of people that are just like barely hanging on by a thread will show up and just be disappointed. It doesn't sound like that's the case with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, but that's basically been the viewing experience for the MCU beginning in Phase 4 and basically throughout the entire thing. And as I said, going into Phase 5, Guardians of the Galaxy was the guaranteed winner that they did have. Everything else was a bit of a mixed bag. Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios taking some chances with like a Thunderbolt, changing out Steve Rogers as Captain America, obviously, for Sam Wilson. And then you had some of the more stronger franchises that you really felt had a good chance. Even though Blade is a reboot, it felt like there was a lot of enthusiasm for that. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 wasn't really a chance because it was a known commodity. And at the very least, MCU fans were going to know what they were going to get. And it sounds like a lot of people just decided to take a skipperoonie anyway. And that does not look good for the MCU moving forward, specifically for Phase 5, not to mention all the stuff that's happening with their television shows, where basically they delayed almost everything. There are a couple of shows that are going to come out this year, but most everything has actually been delayed a year or two at this point. There was also a very interesting article from Deadline kind of asking what happened and why it happened and making a few comparisons and actually trying to come up with some answers. And I think they are way off base. This is what Deadline had to ask. Why was the opening here for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 not as vibrant as Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? Sources believe that Part 2's pinnacle was more of a fluke in its overperformance, and that the gross here for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is within the franchises and MCU deeper universe picks real mean. Not to mention, we've seen Guardians appear in a number of movies like Avengers and Thor. Another reason for Guardians of the Galaxy 2 popping in 2017, there was a momentum leading into Avengers Infinity War that was teeing off the following summer of 2018. Still, many are telling me it's not about the overexposure of the Guardians gang, interestingly enough. And I do not believe that the overexposure of the Guardians of the Galaxy are the reason that this underperformed, because they were in the Avengers movies and they had a very brief cameo in that last Thor movie, which was admittedly very bad. You know, Spider-Man was in the Avengers movies, and he did pretty darn good in No Way Home. Doctor Strange was in the Avengers movies. It had a tie into a TV show, and it still did pretty good because people hadn't lost all faith in the MCU at that point. Now, them mentioning that we were building towards Avengers Infinity War, that's true. There was a lot of hype. There was a lot of momentum for the MCU. And that was even able to blow up like a movie like Captain Marvel that nobody was really looking forward to. But I do not for a second believe that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 blowing up was a fluke at all. Not to mention that you did have the hype and the momentum of the MCU itself, but the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie is easily in my top 5 MCU movies of all time, and it's sitting up there like number 3. I think it's one of the best movies they've ever made in the MCU period, and I think people were clamoring for another helping of that when we got to the second movie. I don't think the second movie was nearly as good as the first movie. They tried to rehash too many skits from the first movie that were successful into the second movie. I like Ego the Living Planet, but I did not like The Sovereign. There's just some weird stuff about that movie. It just didn't really work. But I truly believe that even if Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 was one of the best MCU movies ever, this likely happens to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, not because of the Guardians or James Gunn, but because the MCU. It's a damaged brand. Nobody wants to go and waste their money on a substandard movie these days, and that's for the most part going to be your experience supporting the MCU lately. Unfortunately, a lot of that bad juju, those bad vibes ended up rubbing off on the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Deadline also asks, why did Ant-Man and the Wasp go up in its opening as a threequel and Guardians come down? Because the former had the added bonus of Kang the Conqueror, who Disney was fueling up as the next big villain coming off of Loki, and he was a huge part of Ant-Man's marketing, getting Quantumania to a record 3-day, $106 million franchise best debut. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 in its execution looked like the same old. There wasn't a big new notable Marvel personality to incorporate into the campaign. I just don't remember anybody being hyped to see Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania because Kang was going to be there, especially after the character's performance in Loki, because the Loki show kind of sucked, even if Kang himself was actually somewhat interesting at the end. So I think they're completely off base here, because the trajectory moving into Quantumania was that MCU movies basically do better than the predecessor almost every single time, other than like Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, where the first movie blew up to heights that they never could have predicted. And obviously, the Marvels isn't going to do that either. But I think Quantumania might have been the last straw for a lot of people. Seeing MODOK on screen, like, that was like a giant slap in the face. That was a wake-up call. That's a kick in the nuts. That's what Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios were to deliver. That's the quality. Well, maybe that feeling I've had in the pit of my stomach for the last year or two regarding MCU movies and me dreading going to the movie theater was actually correct, and I shouldn't have been wasting my time or money. And I think in the end, they ended up taking it out on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which probably should have done a lot better. But what is it all moving towards? Wow, we're going to see Kang in an Avengers movie, even though we just saw the big bad Kang get defeated by Ant-Man and Wasp in Quantumania. It was like, what are you guys doing? They don't know how to build anything anymore. I think Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios hit this apex where they thought they could do no wrong. They didn't have to work anymore, and they basically driven off an enormous portion of their audience, and they're probably just doomed to death for Phase 5 itself, trying to get over all the failures of Phase 4. Hopefully by the end, maybe Thunderbolts comes around. Maybe the Blade movie does make it into theaters on time, and it is as cool as people hope. And there is a little bit of enthusiasm and quality associated with the MCU at that point, but it's not now. And obviously the Marvels is just going to make it a billion times worse because it looks so bad. And it's a bunch of characters nobody really wanted to see in a movie. So Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios have messed this thing up big time. I don't blame James Gunn. I certainly don't blame Chris Pratt or Zoe Saldana or Dave Bautista or Bradley Cooper or, oh my goodness, that stupid guy from fucking Fast and the Furious. Vin Diesel, that guy. I don't blame any of them. I blame Kevin Feige. I blame Victoria Alonso. I blame Marvel Studios. And this is why they basically had to delay their entire Phase 5 slate of shows that were supposed to debut on Disney Plus this year and next year. They're having to move it all back because it all sucks. They have to clean everything up. If you haven't seen this news, definitely check it out right here. There's also a link in the video description.